This is a 2-year-old crested gecko. And this is a 9-month-old crested gecko using the methods that we are going to be talking about today. So make sure you guys stick around. We have some fantastic advice to give you today, and subscribe if you're new. I'd love to have you around. Let's get into it. Getting a crested gecko to put on size. For years, just like you guys, I used to go to expo tables and see stands like Leap and Leechies have these massive animals at such a young age. Meanwhile, back home, I have animals of similar age that are barely getting above 4 grams. At that point, I continuously ask myself, well, what's the secret? What are these guys doing that I can do to make sure that my animals get big and are able to be a nice, healthy animal to be able to sell? And well, through a couple of years of trial and error, I think I pinned down the 3 biggest factors that are going to make a gecko go from a couple of months being 3 grams to a couple of months being in that 6, 7, 8, even 9 grams. Let's get that list started with the most important one, and that's going to be number 1, feed your crested gecko insects. I'm sure all of you guys were told the same thing that I was told. Heck, I've even probably said in a couple of videos here. Crested geckos don't need bugs. A crested gecko can live its entire life on the crested gecko diet, the big popular ones, Pangea, Rapashi, crested gecko food, things like that. And although, while, yes, that is not false, it's not a myth, you can get a crested gecko going on simply crested gecko food. I've had my breeders raise up on crested gecko food. I've had breeders going for years and years now on just crested gecko food without insects and had 0 to no problems with it. However, here's the big kicker to that. While yes, for years I did not use insects, it took me about 2.5 to 3 years to grow my baby crested geckos that I hatched into actual breeders I can put into projects. Now, the biggest contributor on getting those geckos bulked up and getting a lot of size is going to be feeding them insects. Now, for a while, I thought that was going to be hard because if you grow a crested gecko out on just crested gecko diet, it doesn't want to eat bugs. It's a really hit or miss if they are going to eat, or if you kind of got to do some of those methods to get them to eat insects. They'll probably be saved for another video. However, if you start them young, I like to start at about a couple of weeks when they're, good and settled down, they're eating the crested gecko food readily, throw some pinhead to 8-size crickets in there, I'll tell you guys, I was shocked. Out of the 30 geckos at this point when I started trying this, pretty much all of them immediately went for the food, started hunting like it was their natural born instinct and they were made for this. The fact of the matter is yes, that's exactly the point. They are made for this. Crested geckos absolutely love insects. So yes, while the crested gecko diet will work perfectly fine and there's really no consequences, if your goal is to get that animal with good size, make sure your breeders stay with good size when breeding, creating projects, definitely want to feed insects. Right now, I'm going on twice a week of insects and the rest being Pangea. However, I think I'm going to up that to 3 times a week insects during the summer, and then in the winter time, I'll cool them off and use a bit more gecko food and a bit less insects. But moving on, this makes a great segue to what I talked about earlier, getting into the summer months and then cooling off a little on the insects of the winter month. And that's going to bring us to the second biggest tip to get your crested geckos to grow is going to be number 2, heat those animals up. Just like any cold-blooded animal, their metabolism goes on the temperatures they are in. Colder temperatures are going to be a slower metabolism, and higher temperatures are going to be a faster metabolism. I think this is a big thing I see with a lot of people, and it's actually one of the biggest questions I ask when I get people that say, oh, my crested gecko's not eating that much, it really doesn't eat, what can I do? Number 1 tip is going to be heat the animal up. Now, we've all heard the same thing again. Room temp is what you keep your crested geckos at. Never above 80, that is a death sentence. We went in a whole little crested gecko miss video that I'll lay right here. But pretty much room temp and good to go. And again, generally speaking, room temp is perfectly fine and the crested gecko will do fine. However, once again, if your goal is to get the animal to get size, you're gonna wanna bump those temps up. See, for me, I have my room right now at somewhere around the 76 to 78 degrees. It fluctuates a little bit. If it's hotter outside, it's hotter in here. If it's colder outside, it's a little cooler in here. But I do want to remain above 75. That is going to create a faster metabolism for that animal, which means that animal is going to want to eat more, which means you can then feed it more insects. You can feed it more of the Rapashi or Pangea, some of that crested gecko food. And the more food the animal has, the more its metabolism going and it's pooping out, the faster it's going to grow. It's just basic science. I mean, don't ask me what the science is, I have no idea, but what I do know is big hot temps make gecko grow big. That's the extent of my knowledge, pretty much. I do want to put a little disclaimer here. This does in no way mean hotter means bigger. Do not put these crested geckos at 90 degrees thinking this gecko is going to get huge in 3 weeks. That's not it. The real caveat is I believe the sweet spot is going to be around the 76 to 78 degrees, still in that natural range that the animal would find in its native habitat. However, it being a little warm is going to make the animal's metabolism raise a little bit more. The other second catch to this is, remember, a faster metabolism means the gecko needs more food, so make sure you are providing more food. If you're regularly only feeding your crested gecko maybe 2 to 3 times a week, letting that Pangea sit for a little bit and then replacing it when it gets empty, you're going to want to make sure you have food readily available for that animal at all times while you're doing this higher temperature. It's why, for the most part, I usually always have Pangea available, and then of course I'm substituting for that insects on the cycle that we talked about just a couple of minutes ago. However, if you don't have food readily available, you're going to have a negative effect, pretty much the opposite of what you want. A higher metabolism means the animal is burning more calories, and without that readily available food source, the animal is actually going to start losing weight. So again, just want to put it out there, if you are doing this to get your crested gecko size, you're probably going to end up spending a little bit more money on those insects and on that crested gecko food than what you've usually been doing. Moving on, let's get into the last tip for today. Now, this one might be a little controversial. I'm sure we'll have a couple people in the comment section getting a little gripey about it. However, remember, the goal here is getting size in an animal. This isn't a forever situation. This is for that grow out period from when they're babies to when you want them to be adults and how soon you want that to be. And that's going to bring us to the last tip of the day, number 3, keeping your animal in a smaller enclosure. This probably plays also with probably my most frequently asked question, and that's going to be, Dakota, my crested gecko isn't eating. What do I do? 9 times out of 10, the problem is going to be they put it in way too big of an enclosure. And now I totally understand. We want to do what's best for these animals, and people love to go above and beyond for their pets. It's a new pet, it's exciting, we want to give it everything we can, so that we end up putting these 4 or 5 gram crested geckos in these mansions of tanks, 18 by 18 by 24, as 40 gallons, 75 gallons, things of that nature. And the issue does become is it's not really wanted for that baby animal. Baby crested gecko, and really most animals really would love, is to feel secure in their enclosure, and the best way to do that is going to be creating a small enclosure. It's why right now we use shoebox bins for our babies, and they do absolutely great for it. It's why I always recommend using shoebox bins. While shoebox bins are great, a problem I see with a lot of breeders saying like, oh, I want to get my animal in size, is they're gonna have those babies in those shoebox bins for not long enough. They're gonna end up moving a 4 or 5 gram baby straight into a 20 quart or a 10 gallon tank, something of that nature, which is too big, too fast, in my opinion. See, for me, I keep these animals in shoebox bins for a bit, pretty much until they're around 10 to 12 grams, when they really start to use about pretty much every space they can with that shoebox bin. At that point, I will move them into that 20 quart, and then once they reach that full adult size, they will then be moved into their adult enclosure. And now from the outside view, this might seem a little harsh, a little bit like, wow, Dakota, you're keeping these big animals in these shoebox bins. Why would you do that? That sounds kind of mean and not right. Well, the fact of the matter is these bigger enclosures are going to have some problems with these baby animals. That's going to be finding the food, being able to access the food, of course, burning a lot of calories, jumping around these bigger enclosures, where if it is a smaller enclosure and it is eating, it's going to get a bigger size, burning less calories, having to go find its food. Again, in no way, shape, or form, this is going to be its entire life cycle. I'm not telling you keep a 50 gram crested gecko inside of a shoebox bin. However, if you do want your animal to grow fast, and pretty much at the same time, if you're using these methods, an adult animal is going to go in an adult bin versus moving the smaller animal into an upgraded bin, it's going to make it work just a little bit faster. You're going to get a little bit more progress with growing the animal out to get that goal, if you're a breeder, of getting the animal up to a proper size to eventually breed. But to summarize this entire video, the 3 things you're going to want to need is make sure you're feeding a good quality insect, whether that be any type of roach species or cricket. Personally, I like crickets. They're faster, they're more active, it gets that instinct of the crested gecko going faster. I know people say pinworms. We'll make another video about that, but use crickets. Number 2 is keeping it a little bit warmer than usual. Instead of the average 70-72 degrees, bump that up to somewhere around the 76 to 78 degrees. And lastly, keep them in a smaller enclosure while they are growing out. At that point, when they're adult, you can go absolutely nuts. Put them in a 4x2x4 for one crested gecko. However, when you are growing that animal out, those key about, the 18 to 24 months, that's going to be the biggest point where you're going to want the animal to grow. And at that point, keeping a little bit of smaller enclosure is going to work a lot better for that end goal. And as always, boys and girls, thank you so much for taking the time in your day to follow us over here at Dakota Blue Exotics. I will see you guys next time, but until then, goodbye.